So let's hear from Marsha-Jane.
I don't use the right, I'm not as loud as Owen and Len, unfortunately. But yeah, thanks for that, Claire. And part of the other thing I do is I'm on the LRC National Committee. So the problem with going last, though, actually, one other thing I should say is that despite the green and purple, I'm not here in corporate colours for UNISON, and I'm not an official speaker. And it was really interesting to see. I mean, Len mentioned that Liz Snape was sitting at the back, and for those of you who didn't pick up who Liz Snape was, she's UNISON's Assistant General Secretary, and she was sitting next to the head of our Labour Link. So whilst I'm actually partly relieved that they're not here to hear my speech, I'm also quite disappointed that they're not going to hear the valid criticisms that we've got of it and that they can't respond. But let's hope that they'll come back to us another time. So yeah, I am here unofficially in a personal capacity, etc., etc. I think the medal that I should get is maybe surviving the witch hunt. So after tonight, that may not be the case. So I think. So you know, I think Maria. Oh no, it's not. But. The other problem with going last is Maria Exel gave a fantastic speech which took up a lot of what I was about to say, and as a housing officer I sort of did all the housing points that I was going to mention. So being as it's been a long night and I know you're all itching to hear John, I'll keep my contribution brief anyway. So I think the best thing to do really is just to highlight a couple of examples of how we've failed as UNISON to make our voices heard within the Labour Party, and it's something we've got quite a lot of experience of in recent years. And you know, people will remember back that it was UNISON that proposed the Partnership in Power proposals to UNISON Conference. You know, it was at our request that Party Conference neutered all democracy, and in one fell swoop sort of took away any active trade union and rank and file votes and influence over the party. And it took, I mean, Ben also mentioned the 13 years of disappointment of the Labour government, but it's taken that 13 years to start to try and shift our trade union leadership out of the slavish mode of obedience to the Labour Party, in which they're starting now to come over. And you know, Len has been much better than I expected him to be honest. But we need the rest of the trade union bureaucrats to follow suit, particularly in UNISON and GMB. And that leads me to my second example, which epitomises UNISON's influence over the government during the new Labour years. And in Blair's second term, one of UNISON's key priorities was to prevent the establishment of foundation hospitals, and we lobbied and spent hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to get into MPs to make them vote against foundation hospitals. And UNISON, the Labour government majority was down to 35, and UNISON thought that was a victory at the time. It was such a small majority for them when they'd been railroading everything else through. But following that vote, UNISON Conference noted that the majority of UNISON MPs voted with the government and against UNISON policy. And it was worse than that. In fact, the government's majority within the UNISON group of MPs was larger than the majority in Parliament. So if we'd have took the UNISON group of MPs out of Parliament for the night, they wouldn't have had foundation hospitals. It was essentially the vote of the UNISON MPs who were responsible for the defeat of UNISON policy and the introduction of foundation hospitals, which has led the path for the marketisation of the NHS that we're now seeing with the Tories. And because we'd colluded, with Tony Blair and New Labour in gutting party democracies, when the Labour government were in power, we had no influence over them to get anything done. And I'm clearly not here to praise UNISON Labour Link in any way tonight, but I wouldn't want to suggest that UNISON is uniquely useless in exerting influence in the Labour Party. The general failure of all of the trade unions to influence the party that's been going on over the last few years, and I think most people here will remember that it was epitomised really in the deputy leadership elections, where there was 6 candidates. The trade union nominations split 5 ways, and the person that won was a person that had no trade union backing. And the general context of that failure as well was in the General Secretary's support for Gordon Brown as leader, with tacit support of then bullying MPs to ensure that John McDonnell didn't get on the ballot paper and Gordon Brown didn't have a contest. So, why have we been so weak then in the last few years, the last sort of 15 years or whatever it's been of Labour? And I believe that it's not just a weakness in the party, it's a weakness of democracy in our own trade unions, and again that was something that Len started to touch at the beginning. And in UNISON, it's a little bit more obvious than in other unions, should we say, because when UNISON was created in '93, the documents and the rule book that was drafted up around our political activity were designed in such a way to make sure it was kept away from any pesky rank and file control. And it's a little bit more secret in other unions, but it's just out there in UNISON. There are two completely different political funds, the General Political Fund and the Labour Link, essentially. And the Labour Link has a completely different structure from the union. It has its own conference, although they don't call it a conference, they call it forum. It's got its own national committee. And this completely separate structure has no accountability to UNISON's National Executive Council, and it has no accountability to right, maybe I'll shout. And it has no accountability to UNISON's National Conference, which, our rule book states, as most union rule books say, that the UNISON Conference is our supreme governing body where we take all the decisions, except the Labour Party ones, which are all done and stitched up somewhere else. And, rather unfortunate an example of how bad the Labour Link separate structure is and how we moved away from it is from Labour control is...
Here are better without them, Mike.
Is an example of Norma Stevenson, and that is a shame, because Norma Stevenson, who was a past president of UNISON's NEC and on the Labour Party NEC, wasn't by far she was one of the better presidents we've had in a few years, and is a good comrade politically. And it's not a personal attack on her, but it is an attack on the way UNISON Labour Link works in UNISON. And Norma was on the National Labour Link Committee because she was a member of our National Executive Council, and then the National Labour Link Committee put her on the National Labour Party NEC. But when UNISON members decided they weren't going to re-elect Norma to her seat on the NEC, the National Labour Link Committee decided she could stay on the Labour Link Committee because she was a member of the Labour Party NEC. So she was on the Labour Party NEC because she was on the Labour Link Committee, and she was on the Labour Link Committee because she was on the Labour Party NEC. With, complete circle of no democratic accountability or chain to any ordinary UNISON members that had, nobody had elected her to any position. And that is, just a complete stitch on what happens with our Labour Link. And in general, those areas where we're least effective as trade unions are the ones that are furthest removed away from rank and file control. And I think that's what's happened in UNISON, and that's what's happened in other unions of political strategies. And members of UNISON know very little about how Labour Link works because it's all far removed. With branches can't have any direct input into Labour Link. Claire mentioned I'm branch secretary of Havering in London, and we're trying to work with the local CLP, and we've got a couple of Labour councils now, which is an improvement, but we're trying to work with them supporting the unions. But we can't help them, we can't fund them. Everything has to go through our regional office, one or two people in the region who have the power over all the money, which just goes into the central London Labour Party. So, and we talk about the bureaucracy of the trade union movement and the bureaucracy of the Labour Party, but they're interchangeable, they're one and the same, and we see that even talking in Liverpool. There isn't two separate bodies, they are the same bureaucracy of the Labour movement. For example, in London, our regional secretary is also vice chair of the London Labour Party, and it's through her that all the money from the branches are filtered. We don't have any say in any of that. So it's difficult to get people's members and get ordinary UNISON members to CLPs, because I couldn't get nominated to my local CLP in Newham because UNISON wouldn't rubber stamp it. Even though I lived in Newham and was an active Newham Labour Party member at the time, they wouldn't send me to the CLP. And because of the undemocratic nature of the Labour Link, members are sort of voting with their feet. So when we started UNISON merger, we had 40% members choosing to pay into our Labour Link bit rather than the General Fund. And the General Fund just deals with our anti-racism work and that sort of stuff. But at the minute, it's just over 30%. There's a 10% drop in recent years, and that's declining every year. Other comrades outside the party, understandably, but every now and again, call for us to have a debate on whether or not we affiliate to the National Labour Party. And, let's just be clear, if it wasn't for the undemocratic way that it's stitched up at our conference, we would have lost that debate, I think, over the last few years. And that's something that our leadership would have deserved for their sort of slavish obedience to New Labour. But it isn't something that our members would have deserved then, and it isn't something that our members would deserve now. And I think we would have lost that, particularly at the height of the Tony Blair years around the Stop the War stuff. We would have lost the affiliation debate. The strength of feeling was so strong on our conference floor, but we just weren't allowed to discuss it. And, I say, that wouldn't be then, and it isn't now, what our members would have deserved. I will stop, just to wrap up, we didn't deserve a union then that capitulated to New Labour. We don't deserve a union that couldn't stop New Labour attacks, and we don't deserve a union now that is talking down our action on November the 30th, is
openly saying, as some of our national assistant general secretaries are, that the action wasn't strong enough, it wasn't effective, and we don't deserve a union that's capitulating to the Tories over pensions. What we do deserve is a trade union which uses our influence in the party to make the party, again, the party of the working class. I accept, actually, I think Len's point is right, people drift away from the Labour Party, but they didn't go anywhere else, and it was only a small minority that went to the right wing. Most of them just sat at home, and we need to get back to them. And the way we do that is by the trade unions exerting influence to make it a party which aims to resist rather than moderate austerity, and a party which aims to transform rather than save capitalism. You know. And my couple of examples about UNISON, yes, they were amusing, etc., but they're not designed to be negative and despondent, but to highlight the fact that, you know, the reason that we have been weak and timid in the Labour Party is because it's not been democratic, and because we need rank and file democracy within our unions, and we need structures within our unions that take it forward in the Labour Party, and that's what the LRC and John McDonnell try to do. You know, John McDonnell does fabulous work with his parliamentary groups, and we need to break down the political and industrial wings and just be one movement. Just one final point. But all I was saying, you know, to those that are saying the fight for the Labour Party is over, but it's not over because it's not over until we've actually, as trade unionists, started fighting.